I think that I have grown in the discipline of remaining humble and there's a softness so that even when I do mess up, I'm much quicker to ask for not even forgiveness, but just to make it right. You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christy Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to the Famous at Home podcast. Today we are talking about words that matter for your family. So if you've been listening over the last couple of weeks, we started a series called Words That Matter for Your Family. We started with safety. We then went to a word called attunement, and we talked about that last week. This week we are moving to another word that is critical for families, and that's the word discipline.
Which I think is going to conjure a lot of thoughts of what that looks like in relation to our kids and how we discipline. And we will talk about that a little bit. But
we will. But I think the discipline part of it, as it relates to our kids, is only a small part of it. And we'll talk about what that looks like, because we're talking about words that matter for our family, not words that matter for our kids. So what does discipline look like?
Clarification, yes.
What does discipline look like in the context of our marriage?
Yeah.
What does discipline look like in the context of my individual life?
Yeah. Because
the reality is this, that our kids become who we are. And so if our kids become who we are, who am I becoming? And what does discipline look like in my personal life? What do my kids look like? What's discipline look like as my kids are looking up to my marriage and looking towards my marriage? And so I think those are huge questions that we want to answer today. Before we do, I just want to remind us, we are in the Christmas season, and if you forgot,
you were unaware,
we are now officially, I think, in the Christmas season. It depends on where you live and who you are as a family. You might have put your Christmas tree up the day after Halloween. You may already be doing it, or you may not. You may still hold to the rule of Thanksgiving, not until after Thanksgiving. But we just want to remind you that the 25 Days of the Christmas Story, an Advent family experience, is available. All the links in the show notes. But we would encourage you to go get it. It's 25 days that we walk through every character. We walk through from Elizabeth to Anna to Zechariah to the gold, myrrh, and frankincense, and what do they mean, and what do they mean for the coming of Jesus. And then there's activities in there for you to do with your family, such as holding a birthday party for Jesus, and various experiential ways that you can engage your kids and your family to learn today what the Christmas story feels like. What does faith feel like? What does trust feel like? That type of thing. So we encourage you to go get 25 Days of the Christmas Story.
I think what I love about it so much, we just did an interview on it, and so I actually read the whole thing on an airplane because it's been a year since, and I couldn't remember. And so to just look through it and realize how much it's brought our family together, doing the experiences together, because it's not just reading a story, which, that's great too, but it actually bonds us together. And some of the activities, it's really, it's us. So it's getting to the heart. It's getting to the heart of one another. And I think that's what you need in the Christmas season, because it's already so busy that this is the calm, connected place where you actually get to be together and grow. And
it's not one of those where you feel like you have to do every single day. So you can start day one on December 1st. And if you make it through to December 21st or 25th, you can.
That feels
or you
like
can
an
go
award.
back and forth either. Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, well done.
We're the family
or
that
you can choose a
the
day
first
here
5
and there
days,
and that type of thing.
We're crushing it. And then.
And then we just pick and choose and do what we feel is,
when you
is
can.
good. So yeah.
Because that's life.
Let's talk about discipline today.
Let's talk about
discipline.
What does discipline mean to you?
What does discipline mean to me? To me, let me go to the Bible first, because I just think I want to start there. I want to talk about discipline. You hear us talk about, and I think this is why we went to discipline next. You hear us talk about emotional safety. You hear us talk about attunement. And the way that I describe those in the book Safe House is I describe those as being, I describe this as grace and truth, leading in grace and following up in truth. And the idea there is that this really is, Jesus came full of grace and truth. It can feel, when we talk about emotional safety, it can feel like all we're talking about is grace. But if that's all you hear, then you're hearing it wrong. You cannot live without discipline. You cannot live without truth. The trouble is, and I think this is where we have gotten sideways, is we think of discipline immediately as a parent, and we think of discipline immediately as I have to correct my child so that my child doesn't become a brat.
Right.
Right. And so that's what's been handed down to us. And however, I think that what we have to pay attention to is, are we leading in truth? Are we leading in discipline? Because as my friend John Townsend says, grace or truth without grace will always lead to condemnation. And we know in Romans 8, it says, there is now therefore no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. Those of us in Christ Jesus, there's no condemnation. But when we lead in truth hard without grace or without attunement, then this is why we started with attunement and started with safety, is because what ends up happening is you end up alienating and building a wall between your heart and your child's heart. And the reality is this. I think this is where we're really going to hit the dagger. And I'm saying this with all the grace and emotional safety that I possibly can to you today. Discipline starts with us. How disciplined am I? I'm going to go to me. How disciplined am I in what I eat? How disciplined am I in how I take care of my body? How disciplined am I in how I treat Christy? How disciplined am I in how I go to church or how I serve other people? How I engage people in the world around me? How disciplined am I at handling a situation of conflict when somebody wrongs me? How disciplined am I about controlling my tongue? The list goes on and on. And I think so often what ends up happening is there's a transfer, there's a trickle down effect on our lack of discipline into our kids' lives. And so if we want to talk, we can talk about spanking and do we spank, do we not spank, do we do time ins, do we do timeouts, do we, take away? We can talk about all those things. But at the end of the day, I genuinely believe, and I think the research supports this incredibly much, that our kids pick up who we are and how disciplined we are. And I think it starts there.
Wow. I think those are the things, as you're going through this list, you just have to take a pause and realize how much of our children's behavior is dictated by ours. When you see a kid, I saw a kid like yelling at a grocery store the other day, and I just thought, he was so young, and it was the way he was speaking to his mom that I just was like, he's heard that somewhere. Like he's heard someone speak like that to her. And it just, and obviously like this happens in our own home. I heard our son yell at the dog the other day, and I'm like, buddy, like he's heard it from me. He's heard me yell at the dog. And you realize our own lack of discipline in whatever area it's absorbed by them. And that's not to put a whole lot of undue, we're not like blame shifting. Like it's not the kid's fault. It's the parents' fault. This is just, it's like all of us growing in discipline is how we're going to grow in discipline. And I think a lot of us have probably heard that Mr. Rogers quote, which discipline, he thinks of it as the everyday process of being self-disciplined.
Yeah, the continual everyday process of learning self-discipline.
And I think that is just a beautiful understanding of what discipline is, because it's continual, it's everyday, and it's learning. So not like I've failed at this, but like we can all improve at this. And I think there's so much healing that can happen too when you as a parent start to grow in your own discipline, and then how that filters into our kids. I know for me, it started with waking up early. We talk about this in Famous at Home, and we start about the decisions. And that first decision was waking up early. And so in order to do that, I had to go to bed earlier I had to decide I was going to do it, because obviously when that alarm goes off, you want to sleep in. Like you don't want to, but it started this process for me of starting to reprioritize myself. My time with the Lord in the morning was so critically important to how I act and how I behave with Josh, with the kids, at work. So it was that one thing that I started to add discipline to. And I remember, I don't even, if some of you have listened to the podcast with Ash and Dino Patron, we did that a while ago, but I remember he said discipline in one area basically just filters out or feeds into the next area, and it's sort of an overflow. And I thought that's exactly what happens when you start to show discipline in one area.
Yeah.
And like it's like a muscle. Like you actually have to exercise that muscle and get it stronger. And then you come to depend on it. Like you realize it's there for you when you are in a situation where you can choose not to, or you can. That muscle has tone because it's been put to use. And so you wake up, even though it's hard, you're careful what you eat. You are guarded in your words. I think that's probably one of the most difficult ones as parents is and how we respond to stress. Like that we don't just let it fly out, but we're actually able to get ourselves back to a regulated state, and we're able to interact with our kids and those that we love in a way that's kind. And that takes discipline.
And I want to just talk about the word discipline itself, because I think starting this, practically speaking, how do we move forward with this word? I think we have to have a define the relationship
a DTR
with this word discipline. And I think in some respects, we have to rethink about what the word discipline means for us in our individual lives. And then practically, as Christy's talking about, what does that look like in certain areas of our lives right now that help us to be able to practically include discipline in our everyday lives? And then what does that look like in how we discipline our kids? So I want us to look at the word discipline. And one of the things that I want us to take a look at is just scripturally. I just want to land there for a second. And I want us to look at the word discipline throughout the Bible. Because I think so often what we think of is he who spares the rod spoils the child. It's like, oh, that's the discipline chapter, verse of the whole world. And it's like, actually, it's really not. Sure, there's a verse there, and basically it means, obviously, like, let's discipline. But, and again, we could get into the whole spanking component and the whole spanking debate all we want. When you look at the data and you look at the research, I don't even know how much I want to get into that, to be honest with you. But like, look at the word rod. I might flip this on its head. Look at the word rod. The word rod in the scriptures, that's a rod that a shepherd used. Well, a shepherd used that rod not necessarily to strike a sheep, but to guide it. And so I think we have to put our Western ideology onto what Scripture says about discipline. However, I do think discipline's important, but I don't know if it's the way that we tend to think of it. And I therefore want to help us understand what discipline does look like. So Proverbs chapter 12, verse 1, I think this is awesome. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, right? But he who hates reproof is stupid. That's it. Need I say more? Okay, so if you don't like being disciplined,
all the parents who are like, I don't let my kids say stupid. Wasn't that our kids go to a Christian school and they had to memorize like certain scriptures, and then that word was in there, and they thought it was like the funniest thing.
I love it. I
love
get
to
word.
say stupid because it's in the Bible.
Yeah, and for those, they don't go to a Christian school; they go to a Christian 2-day-a-week hybrid school because we do homeschool. So, for those of you who listen to hear us say that we homeschool, that's what.
Oh,
I just want to clarify, like, so people are like, wait a minute, I thought you said you homeschool. No, we actually, we do. But they also go to a 2-day-a-week tutorial.
We call it school because it feels like school.
It does feel like school. So look at this. Therefore, in Job 5:17, therefore despise not the discipline of the Almighty. Don't despise the discipline of the Almighty. One of the other things I love is, and there's so much of this throughout the scriptures, whoever loves discipline. That's Proverbs 12. So I've already read that one. Let's just go to Hebrews, because this is kind of the big one right here. For my son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves. He disciplines those that he loves. He chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. God is treating you as sons and daughters, right? For what son is there, what child is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline, in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. If you are left without discipline, right? Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as it seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. For the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. What's the purpose of discipline? His holiness. To become more like him, to become more holy. Does it feel good? No, it doesn't feel good. And I think that's why we have this idea of, we have this relationship with discipline that just feels like, I hate discipline. I don't feel like, and you think about it, you talked about waking up early. How good does it feel to wake up early in the morning?
Well, in the moment, not great, but then it's great. It's that, like, do you hear that? The peaceful fruit of righteousness, the peaceful fruit, the fruit of what you're sowing, right? The discipline, because you're sowing the seeds. And yeah, it is sometimes painful to sow the seeds, or at least the initial part of it. But then you reap the peaceful fruit.
The law of sowing and reaping.
And I think that is like, we all know it, but it's getting over that initial hard. It's just hard and like just at the very front. It's like getting your shoes on to go do a workout. It's like the worst part.
Yeah.
You get past that and you're in it.
And your diet. Like I think about it for me. So that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier, is like, how do we practically do this? And you started it, like, I think one area of your life, and it goes and it flows, right? So just waking up in the morning or eating. Like, I've changed how I eat, and that is significantly difficult when you are trained to eat sugar, or you're trained to eat junk, or you're trained to eat seed oils, or, and people are like, what the heck are you talking about? I choose now to eat a certain way. And for a while, it takes a minute to really not give into the cravings. But once you do, you start to feel good. Yeah. And you're like, oh my goodness, my body's starting to feel so much better. And all of a sudden you are, you're seeing the fruit of the discipline pay off in your physical body. How much more for our spiritual lives?
Yeah.
How much more for who we're becoming? And one of the things we talk about in the book, Famous at Home, is our children will not outgrow our level of spiritual or emotional maturity while they're under our roof. So for us as parents and adults to be leveling up our level of spiritual and emotional maturity is really, really huge for our kids.
Yeah. Well, and I think that speaks, it's just the responsibility that we carry as a parent, because it's not just about us anymore. And I've had this conversation with so many women who struggle with that concept of actually taking time for themselves and waking up and having the quiet time, making intentional time to like go on a date with their husband or get coffee with a friend, or take care of their bodies, like how they exercise, eat, because it feels selfish. And the like breakthroughs in people where we flip this on its head and you realize this is actually my way of loving my family, because I'm showing up now as the best version of me. Like, this is my worship and unto God, first of all, because this is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and this body, like, if you had a temple, like if you were like a temple keeper, if you were, you're a church custodian, you're a pastor, you care about what it looks like. You care because it's a reflection of the one that it's meant to worship. And yet I think so often we get so consumed with the care of other people that we don't recognize, or we just forget, I suppose, that it applies to us too. And if our kids are seeing us treat ourselves this way while doting all over them, like, what message does that send to them? Like, what message does that send to my daughter when she's going to be a mom one day? And you're like, well, I just learned that I had to like suck it up and just, die on the altar of motherhood because that's what I saw my mom do. No, I don't want that for her. But yet we believe a lie, really. I mean, it's just the enemy whispering these lies in our ears that tell us, take the easy way in certain ways, where it's like, don't do that. Like, that's too hard. Or like flip to the other wing, and it's like, oh, but be a martyr. That,
that's good. That's a good.
There's this middle ground where it's like, what if we lived a life of just quiet discipline, where like we did the good hard things, because we knew the fruit that they produce, but at the same time, we're willing and I don't know if it's able. We're just like, we desire to also care for ourselves. So we will carve out time for ourselves, and we will not die on the altar of motherhood or fatherhood, but we will thrive.
Not even that altar, like not even, that's a, like, you know, I just think we make up these things of like, it's that martyrdom, right? We talk about that. Like it's making myself a martyr. And the reality is like, for me, the reason I'm eating healthy, the reason I'm working out, the reason, number one, it influences big time my emotional, how I show up emotionally. It also influences my spiritual life dramatically. But also too, because I'm an older dad, you know, with a 2-year-old, like I think about how old I will be when he's 18 and when he's 20. And I'm going, I want to give energy to my kids. I want to give, and again, you can't control every single day, but I can control how I live today.
Yeah.
I can control my continual everyday process of learning self-discipline. And I think at the end of the day, what's been fascinating about this is I've been pushing our 10-year-old to work out or to eat healthy and that type of thing. And I heard him the other day go, Dad, I just don't want any sugar today. I just don't, I know that I'll get sick. It'll weaken my immune system a bit. And I just know that I'd rather not eat sugar. And I'm going, oh my gosh, that was unsolicited. He's picking up how I'm living my life. He is starting to think about how his muscle growth. He's starting to think about these things. Why? Because he watches his dad take care of his body. And I think, and again, that's not to put anything on me like, oh, look at me. It's to say, I just want to live a healthy life. Well, because I'm giving something. I want to transfer something to my children, and discipline is a transfer of something onto your children. What are you transferring onto your children? Okay. And I think that is what discipline really needs to look like, is how is my continual everyday process of learning self-discipline? How are my kids picking up self-discipline? Because when they're older and they're out of the house, it will have been that they learned self-discipline. What are they picking up from me? What is my transfer of discipline onto my kids?
Well, and I just want to say, you were like saying, I just want to actually give credit to you though, because you have made a major change in how you take care of your body and how you eat and working out in the last number of years, but diet in the last probably year. And I just I want to just commend you for it, because it's changed me, it's changed the kids. And like, that's a perfect example of where one person's just he just embraced that discipline and like felt like a true conviction, I think. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't quite feel it so much. I'll be totally honest, but it sort of filters in when you're like, I'm living around you and I'm watching you. And it was like, oh, okay, I guess I can do that too. It wasn't that I was that passionate about it in the beginning, but I am now. And so, and I look at the kids, and and not to cause, not that you're wanting to cause them to be like overly concerned about really any of those things, but to just be aware. It's just like teaching them,
awareness. That's it.
Because I mean, we're ones that try to at least not be obsessive in anything, because I just think that's that word, even just
to live a balanced life.
Yeah.
There's a Proverbs there's a verse in Ecclesiastes about that, which I'll find it here in a minute. I'll read it, but yeah.
And I think everyone can you hear what I'm saying when it's just, it can become an obsession. And there were certain accounts, I remember following, and like, they're just so full out on one end of the spectrum. And while it's interesting for a while, because it's so counter the world, at some point you're like, yeah, but that feels a little unbalanced. Like, that feels obsessive. And I think as believers, that's not the goal. Like, God is the goal. There's no other idols.
Right.
And so when those things become idols and then kids pick up on that, that's his own form of, I think, destruction. And so for us to just follow a way that's wise, and obviously we always say, like, within the realm of balance, like, you will never live a balanced life, but to walk the road. It's like, I just think it's the road of wisdom. It's that narrow road that Jesus said, like, come and follow me. And it's a beautiful path when you actually are obedient enough to follow it, and you don't keep jumping off and trying to follow your own way.
One other thing too that I'll say is this is, again, and we've said this over the last couple of weeks, and I hope if you're new to the podcast and you're picking up on this, if you've listened for a long time, I'm pretty sure you've picked this on up by now. Just the way we live our lives, we're not prescribing that onto you. I think in Romans 14, it says, let your convictions be your convictions. So if your convictions are to eat a certain way, or if your convictions are to exercise, or your convictions are, maybe they're not even in the area of physical health. Maybe your convictions are in the area of emotional health. Maybe your convictions are in the area of, I haven't even been in the Word lately. Maybe you haven't been going to church on a regular basis. Maybe it's, you're saying, I just want to get my family back into church. As Christy said earlier, that discipline feeds into each area of our lives. I really encourage you, find the area of your life that Holy Spirit is convicting you right now of saying, this is an area that I need to really focus on in my discipline. And to get practical, I believe that's how you have to start. It's got to be one thing at a time, right? So pay attention to one thing at a time. Christy started with waking up early. I started with working out in the morning. It's all about where do we start? What does that look like? And it has transferred over into us and how we speak to one another, how we treat one another. And so I want to, so let's talk about, we've talked about discipline. We've talked about our relationship to discipline, learning to love discipline, because yes, it doesn't feel good in the moment, but the reward is beautiful. It's righteousness, it's peace, it's holiness. It is this transfer of self-discipline onto our kids and in the entire home. And so I think it starts with us individually. And I would say, what is that one thing Holy Spirit is convicting you of right now that say, hey, I need to get disciplined in this one area? I
love that.
Then I want it, because it started with us individually, and then it transfers over into our marriage. And that's the question I want to say to Christy, or ask you right now is, how have you seen discipline play out? Like, where have you worked on discipline? And I can answer the question first if you want me to, because I'm just throwing it out there. Where have you been most disciplined, or where have you been working? What's your continual everyday process, or has been in the past couple of years, of working at self-discipline in our marriage?
Ooh, that's a good question. Like, I don't know.
Because as you think about it, I just want to restate this, and I think I've said this before, but Robert Epstein did a meta-analysis of what are the top 10 parenting strategies to get the outcomes we most desire in our kids. He did this a number of years ago. And what he found in this meta-analysis, where you take a whole bunch of studies, is he found that how you treat your spouse is the third most effective parenting strategy on the planet, right? How you treat your spouse. That you want to talk about discipline, I think we got to get disciplined. You talk about discipline with kids. I think we got to get disciplined individually, and then I think we have to get disciplined in our marriage. And then we can start talking about discipline with our kids. Because here's the reality. Kids will smell out.
Yeah.
They'll smell you out in a heartbeat. Like, stop yelling at your sister. And you're just like, are you just yelling at me? Like, that makes no sense. Like, I'm going to yell at you to not yell? Anyway.
Oh my gosh.
Stop hitting your sister as you hit your child. Like, those types of things are just, I just don't understand it.
But we
do it. And again, we do it.
Yeah.
What I don't understand is it's like, when you're not catching yourself, or you're actually not looking at, you're not aware of it. Yeah. Like, I'm like, wait a minute. How are we not aware that I'm doing the very thing I just told you not to do? Mm-hmm. Or I'm doing it with I'm doing it with my spouse. Like, don't treat your sister that way. And then I turn around and I go and treat Christy the same way. Like, we have to be aware of that.
I'm like sitting here racking my brain, trying to think of, because if I'm totally honest, I keep thinking of the ways that I could say that one and they'd be like, no, but then I messed that one up. And it's like, I don't.
Well, we do mess up, but at the same time, because we're human.
That's why I'm saying this. Cause like it's like so human, and I want people, I just want you to hear, cause that question, like, I don't even know how to answer it, because the critical voice in me is hearing like, oh, but you don't always do that. So,
but I would say, and I think it's a great conversation to have, because I think what ends up happening is you have to look at, how are we growing over time?
Yeah.
Are we getting better at it over time? You're not just, it's like this. If you're parenting your kids and you tell your kids and you're like, sit up at the dinner table, like, let's just use that one for an example. How hard is it to train our children to eat out in public, right? When they're little, it's like, don't get up until you're asked to be excused. Just sit on your bum. Use your fork. Like, if your child learned how to eat properly the very first time that you told your child to eat properly, your job as a parent would be over, right? Like, if your children stopped yelling at people, if your children stopped hitting their siblings, if your children stopped being disrespectful, if they stopped doing and they started acting the exact way you wanted them to act at the first time you told them, your job as a parent is over. There's no reason to shepherd a child's heart beyond that because they listened the very first time. I know of no human who's ever done that. I can't even do that. I'm a human being. Like, for me, the things that I'm saying right now are, yes, I mess up. Yes, I have to figure out how to make it right when I wronged you, because I do wrong you. I speak, not appropriately to you at times. I say things that I'm like, oh, shoot, I shouldn't have said that. But we do that. But then I go and I correct it. And I think the key is are we correcting it?
Yeah.
Are we growing over time? Am I still getting into the same arguments with Christy over and over and over again because I'm treating her the same way without repenting and turning from it? Then I've got an issue that I've got to pay attention to. And I think that's the key is, are we constantly having to say, oh, I'm so sorry for doing that. And then I go and do it 3 hours later. Yeah. Or am I so sorry that I'm doing that? And then it's like 5 months down the road, I'm like, oh, shoot, I did it again. And then to me, that is the continual everyday process of learning self-discipline is to experience it like that. I think, I don't know if that helps, but I think that's
it does help. Key. But I just wanted to say that as a very honest response from me. That's how my brain is like, oh, but I don't do that perfectly every time. And probably a lot of us feel like that because
you're an Enneagram 1.
There's also that component. But I think a lot of humans, we focus on what we're doing wrong and we hang that over ourselves with shame. But I would say, I guess, as I've been sitting here thinking, I think that I have grown in the discipline of remaining humble and there's a softness so that even when I do mess up, I'm much quicker to ask for not even forgiveness, but just to make it right. I'm so sorry. I did not, that came across. And just without this prideful edge where you're like, no, I was right and you were wrong. I feel like I've done better at that. Right.
I love that you're asking, right?
Well,
how am I doing?
I am an Enneagram 1, so I do need the Christy, positive validation that what I just said.
You have done amazing with that.
Thank you.
You have you articulated it so well in a way that I don't think I would have articulated it.
Well, I feel like that's the underlying.
The softening is a big piece of
it. That's the underlying
and
thing.
And not being
so
as critical.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Because the inner critic in your inner world, and that's part of what I get, is your inner critic comes out on me.
Right.
Can come out on me, but it hasn't as much. You've been much softer. You've been much more understanding. And I hope that I have returned that.
Yeah.
I hope that I have returned that.
But I think that's what's beautiful is this is how this discipline thing overflows is one person, when I'm not being defensive or critical, well, let's put it back in the terms that we were just saying it. I'm not being critical. Therefore, you don't have to be defensive anymore. And this beautiful thing just kind of keeps going round and round because we're not entering into those spaces. Because we talk about your dance, and we could link a whole lot of episodes, but in the Famous Dinner book, we talk about our dance, and it's how we interact in relationships. And all it takes is one person to change the entire dance. And you change that reaction, right? Or actually make it a response. Whereas, the reaction's what just flies out. The response is really what requires the discipline to respond and not react in a way that's healthier, in a way that's loving, the way that's filled with grace. And so I am really glad that you agree that you
have a ton. And the area that I've been focused on discipline in our marriage has been,
let's see if I agree.
Well, for me, and again, there's a lot of areas. So please don't hear me say that this is the only area that I'm focusing on. However, it is one that I have tried to pay attention to. And that's in using my words. And again, I slipped up the other day. I slipped up the other day. But it's how I use my words in making sure that I do not trigger Christy into a reactive response. So for example, using catastrophic language, being overly exaggerating.
I was like trying to think what you were referring to. So and that means like that he'd be like, Christy, this is a disaster.
Yeah.
And I'm like you just use that term, right? Everyone in hearing distance is like, and
it goes back to the atmosphere of the home.
Yeah. Your whole body like gets on guard because like it sounds so.
It's kind of like Christy's. You're like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And you're like, oh, there was a squirrel just ran out in front of the car, and I just thought I was going to hit it, but it was like 20 feet. It was like a mile.
That
down
one
the road,
is actually like legit. I feel like that requires but. I usually do them because I like get like a text message from a friend or something, and it was like,
and I'm like,
great
what
news.
just happened?
And
but anyway, there was a shoe in the middle of the road. We were on a trip, and there was a shoe in the middle of the road the other day, and I was like, oh my gosh, somebody lost their shoe. And Chrissy's like, Josh, you can't do that to the kid. You can't do that to it.
So it was the way you started it. It was like, it wasn't even.
I didn't do that.
You didn't do that, but it was like this, like again, like this is really big.
Oh my goodness, somebody lost their shoe.
Yeah, that.
Yeah.
So that. Right? And our 2-year-old is in the back. He's like, shoe? Like his face, he's so concerned.
He didn't stop saying shoe.
For like minutes.
He was
we
really
had to
concerned.
keep talking about this
so
person.
I had to correct this in the car because, and I'm trying to not do those things. I'm trying to pay attention to, because it has been something that I do, and it's not helpful to the family, and especially to Christy. And so I've been trying, but again, I messed up, so I had to apologize.
Okay, but no, for real, you haven't done that. Like, it is. You have done so much better. You have cut way, 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 way back. In fact, to the point where like I feel like I point out things more, or I'll be like, oh, and you're like Mr. Joe Positive all of a sudden.
It is true. I like being positive. I think it's because I'm eating well. I think it makes me happier.
Wow. Seed oils and sugar, they make you a grumpy person. Maybe. But listen, but here's the truth. This is where discipline flows into every other area.
100%. That's a great, I love that. So we have a few more minutes left.
Okay.
We're talking about words that matter for our family. We're talking about discipline.
No, we're actually going to talk about
and now we'll talk about discipline with our kids.
About. Yeah.
So if you've been waiting, by the way, if you have been taking a look at everything that we're talking about with kids, emotional safety, you get the What Am I Feeling book, the What do I do with worry, what do I do with anger. You know that's the direction we've been going. We're getting ready to launch our My Kids EQ curriculum. We would love for you to check that out. We are doing a brand new ambassador coaching program. It'll be for those who want to jump in early. You want to get a hold of the curriculum. You want to be part of actually looking at the curriculum for the first time and then helping us edit it and transform it and make it so that it's exceptional as we do a major launch. We want you guys in on the front end of this thing. It's going to be a coaching program where I just pour out everything that I know about emotional intelligence with kids and the biblical basis for that. So we'd love for you to check that out. It'll be in the show notes today. My Kids EQ Ambassador Coaching Program. If you have any questions at all, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to have you be a part of that program. Discipline will be a part of that program, of course, because we genuinely believe in grace and truth and raising our kids in both. How do we talk about discipline with our kids? Again, I think the overflow, I'm going to go back to that research study that Robert Epstein did in his on this meta-analysis, the top 10 parenting strategies to get the outcomes we'd most desire in our kids. In that research study, the number 7 was discipline or behavior modification. It wasn't even in the top 6. It was 7th on the list. And I think one of the things we have to pay attention to is how much we tend to overemphasize discipline in our parenting. It's like if my kids are not well behaved, then I'm a bad parent. And the reality is that could be true. But I'm just kidding. It's one of those things where it's like that's our go-to. That's the first thing we think about. Is like, oh my gosh, if my kids aren't well behaved, then I'm a bad parent, and therefore I need to come down hard on them. And the reality is it all starts with love and affection. It all starts with our management of our own stress. It all starts with how we treat our spouse. It all starts with how we show up into the world, and then it filters over into behavior modification. And so let's talk about discipline. There's a number of different ways. And we've done an episode in this in the past. I think it was like the nine ways we shoot ourselves in the foot with discipline, and we could talk about that. We should redo an episode on discipline at some point. There's a number of ways we shoot ourselves in the foot with discipline. I think one of those is that we tend to tell our kids not to do something that we're already doing. That's one of those ways. Another way that I think that we tend to do this, or we have to pay attention to this, is that discipline starts with behavior modification. So it does start in a one-way relationship. It starts with me telling my son or daughter not to do something, and therefore I'm going to take something away from them, right? That is taking away giving a consequence by taking something away, right? And so there's another way of doing that, which I think we tend not to do as much, and that is giving a reward for a behavior that we see in our kids that we honor and respect and that we want to do, right? Another way to do it is ignoring out a behavior that you don't want to see. So if a child's trying to get your attention and you keep disciplining and saying, no, some of these modifications that we need to make is just ignore out the behavior, right? Now, again, if they're harming someone or doing something like that, it's a different story. And there are times you need to address something. But I think so often what we end up doing is we look at our kids' behavior and we just feel like we have to come down on them right away. Well, here's the reality. Behavior modification is the most basic form of human growth. In other words, it's the most basic form of discipline. So in other words, you're not going to give your 16-year-old a Snickers bar because they drove the speed limit. It's like, I'm going to drive the speed limit today because I know I'm going to get a Snickers bar when I get home. No, you want moral development. It's the most basic form of moral development is what I should say. So you don't want your child, your 16-year-old, driving safely because they know they're going to get a Snickers bar, or because they know that they're going to get, their curfew, they're not going to be able to drive the car. The keys are going to be taken, right? No, you want them to drive safely because there's other people on the road and they want to keep them safe, right? It's a morality issue. And so eventually what you have to do is you have to move away from timeouts. You have to move away from those consequences in behavior. I'm going to ground you. I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And grounding is fine, obviously as kids get older and you take things from them and that type of thing. I think it's incredibly important to do. But there's got to be a point at which there's a two-way relationship between what you are in that discipline. So in other words, it's not just you coming down and proposing a consequence. It's inviting your child or your teenager into the situation and having them help you come up with the consequence, having them help you problem solve for a solution, having them be a part of engaging in this process, going and apologizing to somebody that they've wronged, making it right in some way. Why? Because you want to engage their entire cognitive and emotional parts of who they are, their whole being, their spiritual, cognitive, emotional, holistic part of them, thinking, feeling, and relating at the same time. You want all of that to be a part of making something right, making right what they have done wrong. And that's not going to always feel good. It's not going to feel good because they're going to have to humble themselves to go in front of someone that they have to apologize to. It's not going to feel good because they have gotten something taken away that they really, really loved. It's not going to feel good because they can't get to go do something with friends that they really, really enjoy, or something they were really, really looking forward to. There's times that your children's discipline is going to not feel good to you because you don't get to engage in an activity that they were going to go do that you were looking forward to as a family, because there has to be a consequence, right? And so,
hate those ones.
Yeah, those ones are brutal. But
they stick. They stick for everybody.
They do stick for everybody. And you have to be able to be okay with having your children be a part of their discipline as they age, rather than just coming down and you submitting the discipline and that's it. Or you carrying out the discipline and having your kids submit to you and that being it. There's got to be engagement at some level in order for them to grow morally.
And I think part of that engagement too is the remorse, right? Like ideally,
that's a good.
We're looking just for remorse. Like when you see in your child's face, when they truly feel badly for what they've done, your job is done.
That's a parenting win.
That's the gold right there. And I think we have one child who tends to get in trouble more than others, and yet is probably the quickest to remorse, where you see like just genuinely feels really badly, and knows that they messed up. And I just think the struggle, and I think is where parents who have really come down so hard on the behavior modification side, where it's like commanding, and in the correction, it's the kids that just don't even feel bad. Like, it's just like, oh, here we go again. Like, and they go through the consequence, but it doesn't change the heart. Like, what we're looking for is the remorse, which is the softening of a heart. It's the humility of heart. And perhaps that's even going back to like what I said with Josh, like that's been my discipline. And maybe that's what we all need, is that softening of heart. And that's what we want for our kids. But their kids can't be soft of heart if they've never seen a soft heart. And I think that's why they need to see it modeled from us when we correct, when we've been wrong and when we've wronged them, especially, that they would see us apologize and be genuinely remorseful. Rather than that, sorry, guy, just that sort of like off the cuff, like sorry, as if I'm annoyed that I have to even apologize to you. But I'm like genuinely, it hurt me that I hurt you. And when they see us do that was to one another as, mom and dad, like, I don't know if it's just us, but whenever we like hug in our kitchen or wherever we are, our kids like come barreling in. Like it's like they see that unity back in us. Like even if you're just like something so dumb, but you're just, speaking to each other in a way, like in the kitchen, like, can you, and you make that right. You're like, sorry, I really didn't mean to come across like that. And you just reunify, where you like, basically you're just re-engaging that relationship again and connecting it again. And that could be like a hug or just a handhold or just can we start again? That's my favorite phrase. My mom used to say that to us all the time, is after we were disciplined and we were remorseful, and she would say, can we start again? And that to me was like the best phrase of freedom, and we were back together again. And there was no rift now between her and I. And that's the thing. Like, you'll see a lot of adults these days in therapy because they're afraid. What really happens is it becomes a rupture in relationship. And so when they'll associate discipline to like, I lose relationship with my mom and dad. And that's not the goal. The goal is that I feel so badly because I want relationship with my mom and dad more than anything. Like I desire that relationship. And so I don't want to do anything to put that in jeopardy. And so I will drive well. I will be kind. And
I think that's the key, is like, when we think about the word discipline, are we thinking about it in relation to rupturing a relationship?
Yeah.
Because God wants us to love discipline, because it's when we need to be disciplined. It's our actions. What it does is it ruptures our relationship with the Father. It ruptures our relationship with the Heavenly Father. And He doesn't want that. He wants us to be close to Him. He wants us to grow with Him. And the same thing is true with our kids. I know one of the biggest situations for us is when our children are more remorseful over the consequence that they're going to receive than they are over the wrong that they've caused. To me, that's a bigger issue than the wrong that they did to begin with. Is because now what you're doing is that your child is more concerned about their consequence and what they're losing than they are that the fact that they hurt somebody. And for us, that's a big thing that we have really tried to train in our children, is seeing how they're hurting other people. And it goes back to what you're talking about, this whole idea of relationship. A lot of times our discipline, we need to be disciplined because we did something that's hurting relationship. And I think that's why we love discipline so much. It's like we learn to love discipline because there's freedom in boundaries. There's freedom in having rules. There's freedom when our kids know. And that's one of the ways that we talk about how we shoot ourselves in the foot with discipline is, and these are the three phrases we use. And I talk about this in the book Safe House, is be clear in the rules. one of the biggest mistakes we make is that we're not clear in the rules. So we choose to take off our shoes in our house for the first 2 days after it's been vacuumed. And then after that, we just don't care. And so our kids have no stinking clue then when the house has been vacuumed or whether or not they should be taking their shoes off and on. And if we're coming down hard on our kids for wearing their shoes in the house 2 days after it's been vacuumed, but we've been allowing them to do it for the last week, then that's not being very clear, right? So our kids, we got to be clear with our kids about what is the rule that you want them to pay attention to in this season. And another one is too many rules, right? If there's way too many rules, like focus on the rules that you see them in particular that they need to be paying attention to for discipline in their life. Just like we started this whole conversation with, what's the one area we need to start being disciplined at? Allow your kids to really know, okay, this is the one area I really see that we really need to focus on for discipline in your life right now. And that's sitting down at the dinner table. That's not getting up. That's saying yes, sir, or no, ma'am, or yes, ma'am, or that type of thing. It's
speaking to your siblings with kind words.
Speaking to your siblings with kind words. Kind words are like honey, sweet for the soul and healthy for the body. That's in Proverbs 24. So, you think about what is that one area we want our kids, and be clear with that, and then be consistent in implementing it. Be clear on the rules and be consistent, and then follow through with the consequence. Be clear, be consistent, and follow through. And I think the same thing is true for us as individuals. We want to be clear. We want to be consistent in how we're acting. I want to be consistent in my working out. I want to be consistent in my eating, and I want to follow through on the action that I need to be doing in order to live that life. And so that's the same thing with our discipline with our kids. Be clear in the rules, be consistent, and follow through. And I think at the end of the day, what it does is you're really teaching your kids that discipline is all about relationships. My discipline in how I eat, my discipline in how I work out, those are taking care of the temple of my body so that my relationships are strong. I can be a much better father and a husband and show up differently when I'm feeling good about myself than when I'm not. Yeah. At the end of the day, all sin is about a rupture in relationship. And discipline is making that back right again, is learning how to make that right. It's leading to holiness. And what I'm transferring into my kids, I want to transfer that fruit to them in a way that they can experience true freedom. And it's not, I'll tell you what, I feel more free by not eating sugar and junk foods than when I felt it like, I can eat whatever I want. No, I can't. My body, as Christy was saying earlier, you will reap what you sow in life. And we are more free when we're disciplined.
That's a word. And I think to realize too, for all of us, we can look at the discipline as the repair of relationships, like in every way, or repairing our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with God, with our kids, with our husband. Like that's really what we're doing. So actually it's not this like hard, grinding out process. It's actually just a repair of something that was broken and bringing it back to its original state. And that's beautiful. That's the work of the kingdom.
Hope you guys are enjoying Words That Matter for Your Family. We've talked about safety. We talked about attunement. Today we talked about discipline. And I think the way we set this up, lead in grace, follow in truth. Lead in grace leads to attunement and connection, and follow in truth, because truth is what continues to strengthen relationship. It's what continues to keep that bond strong. Because at the end of the day, to me, that's what it's all about, is about relationship with God and those that we love. So until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home.